All right, welcome to this Deal Flow Explainer. Today we're putting on our global business analyst hats for the Upside Journal to really unpack a fascinating yet incredibly challenging situation. We are looking at the direct clash between the 2026 World Cup's massive, inclusive promise and the logistical travel realities that are staring down business operators, global fans, and honestly, even the participating teams themselves. Now, you already know we are looking at the most logistically complex sporting event in human history. It's spanning the United States, Canada, and Mexico, the whole shebang. But today, we are hyper-focusing specifically on the friction happening right at the borders of the U.S. host cities. We're going to examine how these sweeping visa policies are disproportionately affecting African teams, diaspora fans, and support staff, and crucially for us, what this actually means for the economic projections of this massive tournament. So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off by exploring that promised inclusivity versus the reality on the ground. Then we'll look at the systemic policy shifts causing this, the specific hurdles for African teams and their fans, and finally, we'll break down the economic impacts and lay out a strategic playbook for brands trying to navigate this incredibly tricky landscape.
Section 1. The inclusivity promise versus reality. Okay, so let's set the baseline here, because this split reality we're dealing with is wild. On one side, we have FIFA's core promise, the greatest, most inclusive event in history, and the projections are huge. According to a joint study by FIFA and the World Trade Organization, we're looking at 185,000 full-time jobs, a projected $30.5 billion in gross output, and a $17.2 billion contribution to the US GDP. I mean, that is a staggering amount of money, right? But versus that, we have the logistical reality. We are currently seeing sweeping U.S. travel bans that actually suspend entry for nationals of 39 different countries. And here is the kicker. This includes 4 nations that have officially qualified for the tournament: Iran, Haiti, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal. Now, depending on who you ask, you'll get a different perspective. The U.S. administration cites national security and vetting deficiencies for these policies, while critics argue that they just exclude low-risk travelers without actually improving public safety. But for us, regardless of the politics, from a purely business standpoint, this creates a massive, undeniable structural bottleneck for operators and fans alike.
Section 2. Systemic friction and policy shifts.
Now, you might be wondering just how deep this systemic friction goes. Look at this number: 20. Out of the 54 countries on the African continent, the U.S. State Department has drastically reduced its routine visa processing locations down to just 20 designated regional hubs. Think about that for a second. If you live in one of the roughly 34 African countries that does not have a hub, you literally cannot get routine visa processing locally anymore. You have to travel. And we're not talking a quick drive. We mean crossing international borders, which requires booking flights, getting transit visas for those intermediate countries, and paying for hotel stays, all just to attend a mandatory visa interview that you might not even pass. It's like a giant, wildly expensive puzzle just to get to the starting line.
And when we break down the policy mechanisms, there is a staggering disparity in global access. Look at how this shakes out. While citizens from 42 countries, which are largely in Europe, get to enjoy a very simple, frictionless $40 visa waiver through the ESTA program, absolutely 0 African nations qualify for this. None. Instead, they are forced into this grueling B1/B2 visa process. So what does that entail? Well, it means a $185 non-refundable fee, those mandatory cross-border interviews at the limited hubs we just talked about, and an incredibly high burden of proof. Oh, and let's not forget the backdrop of a heavily debated $15,000 visa bond. Now, to be fair, after intense pressure, the State Department did agree to waive this massive bond for qualified fans with valid World Cup tickets who opt into the FIFA PASS system. But even so, the fact that a $15,000 bond was even on the table perfectly highlights the severe regulatory hurdles these travelers are up against.
Section 3. Logistical hurdles for African teams.
So, with all these rules in place, how are the actual African teams dealing with this? Because surely they get a pass, right? Well, the travel bans do include an explicit exception for athletes playing in the World Cup. But here is the major operational risk. That exception extends to, quote, persons performing a necessary support role. But that term, it is completely undefined. It's totally ambiguous. And because of this gray area, we've actually seen 15 support staff members for the Iranian national team straight up denied visas. And even the president of the Iranian Soccer Federation was initially denied entry. It gets crazier. Omar Arten, a top Somali referee who was actually voted Africa's best men's match official, was turned away at Miami International Airport and deported back to Turkey. They cited alleged associations with suspected terror organizations even though he was holding a valid visa.
And operationally, it goes even further. Certain teams from restricted nations face mandates requiring them to leave the US for Canada or Mexico immediately after their matches conclude. That is an incredibly tight logistical turnaround for any high-performance sports team.
Unsurprisingly, human rights organizations are observing these hurdles very, very closely. The Sport and Rights Alliance, along with Amnesty International, have actively urged FIFA to secure binding guarantees to prevent arbitrary detentions of fans and local communities. The ACLU impartially notes these concerns as well, stating there's a real risk of normalizing authoritarian enforcement at World Cup venues. Now, putting politics aside, from a business and brand perspective, this tension right here between the host nation's incredibly strict security posture and the inclusive global spirit that the World Cup relies on to sell tickets and merchandise, this is a major geopolitical risk factor. If you're a sponsor, you absolutely must monitor this. Section 4, the fan experience and rejections.
Okay, let's zoom in on the micro level. Let's look at the actual fan experience. For fans coming from non-hub African countries, this journey is, frankly, an expensive logistical nightmare. Step 1, you absolutely must secure official tickets first, just to qualify for the FIFA PASS priority scheduling and to get that massive $15,000 bond waived. Step 2, as we noted earlier, you then have to pay completely out of pocket to cross international borders just to reach one of those 20 embassy hubs. And step 3, this is the toughest part. Even if you do all of that, jump through all those hoops, you still have to clear an interview process that currently has a rejection rate of over 40% for fans from African nations. You can do literally everything right, spend thousands of your own dollars, and still get flat-out denied right at the window.
And when they do get denied, this standard rejection letter is just a crushing blow. Over 400 Ghanaian fans, alongside football officials and even local club owners, recently received this exact template rejection letter under Section 214B. It basically says, you haven't proven you're going to go home, and you can't appeal this. It completely crushes their travel plans right at the embassy window. We're seeing fans from Senegal and Ivory Coast, again, two qualified teams directly hit by these travel bans, reporting immense frustration. Some are openly stating that the tournament has become purely about the business world and that it is completely alienating the grassroots supporters who just can't secure these waivers.
Section 5. Grand risks and economic impact.
So, what does this all mean for the bottom line? Well, let's talk numbers. $4,000. That is the average spend per international visitor to the United States. $4,000. That is direct, on-the-ground revenue that host cities like Atlanta, Philadelphia, New York, and Los Angeles are going to lose for every single diaspora and African fan shut out of the tournament due to this visa friction. When you take that $4,000 and multiply by the thousands of fans who are either officially restricted by bans, rejected at the embassy window, or just completely priced out of the application process before they even start, you are looking at a very significant economic bleed for these local economies. And this suppressed international attendance, it creates a massive cascading economic impact. The American Hotel and Lodging Association has already reported that these exact visa barriers are significantly suppressing international demand, leading to hotel bookings that are pacing far below initial projections. In fact, you can see here that 40% of this friction hits hospitality and tourism right on the chin. But critically for our deal flow listeners, and this is what we really need to pay attention to, 35% of this friction results directly in reduced brand activation ROI. Think about it. If you are a global brand that spent millions sponsoring this event, specifically hoping to engage the massive, passionate African football market inside these U.S. host cities, your target demographic physically cannot get to your activations. It's a huge problem.
Section 6. Actionable playbook for operators.
So, how do we solve for this? We need to turn this geopolitical friction into an actionable strategy. Operators absolutely must adapt immediately. First, you need to ensure your corporate clients and key stakeholders leverage the FIFA PASS system as early as possible. Actually, scratch that. Let's be clear. Remember, the PASS system guarantees an interview, not a visa. It just gets you in the room. Second, because international fan travel is going to be heavily suppressed, brands have to pivot and invest heavily in local Diaspora fan zones. Cities like Atlanta and Houston have absolutely massive, vibrant local African Diaspora communities. Lean into that. Activate them locally. It's a total game changer if done right. And third, you need to develop robust hybrid and digital-first fan experiences. If the hardcore fans from Senegal and Ivory Coast can't physically come to the stadiums in North America, you must bring the stadium experience to them digitally in their home countries.
So, as you finalize your commercial strategy for what is undoubtedly the most geographically and logistically complex sporting event in history, I want to leave you with this final thought. How is your brand pivoting to navigate these systemic travel barriers?
Because honestly, you just can't rely on the legacy playbook anymore. You can't just rely purely on international foot traffic showing up at your pop-up tent. You have to be intelligent, culturally aware, and truly global in your approach. Thank you so much for joining us for this Upside Journal Explainer, and we will catch you on the next Deal Flow Breakdown.